American Rescue Plan. The House stages a vote on the biggest bill of the year. White House reaction. President Joe Biden responds to the news as his team deals with a surge of migrants on the southern border. Keeping tabs on China. What you should know as the communist country tries to assert more control. And papal message. Pope Francis returns from Iraq with renewed calls for fraternity. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, March 10th, 2021. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. After much debate, the $1.9 trillion stimulus package passed the U.S. House and is now headed to President Joe Biden's desk. Not a single Republican voted for it, and it was not without fireworks. So when will you see that direct payment in your bank account? Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports. Eric.
Oh, yes, Tracy, that's the question that everyone wants to know is where's the money and when are they going to see it? Well, I did speak with Treasury officials today, and they tell me that by the end of this month, the $1,400 checks should be in there if you have direct deposit. That can be done as well, or you should actually receive it in the mail. Now, today's bill did pass, but it did not go out without any fireworks, as you mentioned. Republicans used a number of stall tactics, for the vote.
One by one, lawmakers in the House made their voices heard on why they believe the next COVID relief bill should or shouldn't pass.
Only 9% of this massive $1.9 trillion package goes to fighting COVID-19. And outside of stimulus payments, nearly half won't even be spent this year.
A once-in-a-lifetime pandemic requires bold investment, and that is what the American Rescue Plan is.
We still have $1 trillion set aside for COVID relief and spending. There is no need to enslave the American people.
Georgia Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene then asked for a House vote to adjourn, which failed. Hours later,
the motion is adopted.
The historic and massive nearly $2 trillion relief bill now heads to the president's desk. It consists of $1,400 direct checks for individual Americans making less than $80,000 a year and married couples making less than $160,000 a year. $300 a week unemployment assistance, funding for state and local governments, schools, and vaccines. But pro-life leaders warn billions of dollars in health care spending under the legislation could be used to fund abortion providers, such as Planned Parenthood, or subsidize abortion coverage in health care plans. And despite its price tag, when asked if this is the last relief bill funded by the American people, Speaker Nancy Pelosi said,
"It's not anything anybody can predict. It's just a question of the science, and we will have legislation to address it for as long as it's there."
An interesting fact is the GOP does plan to use the passing of this bill as ammunition in the upcoming 2022 elections. Now, a lot of Democrats do face re-election in that, and the GOP party does plan to use everything from social media to even television commercials. From the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
While Republicans have ripped the American Rescue Plan as a liberal wish list, the White House and President Joe Biden are celebrating its passage. They see it as a major victory less than 2 months into his presidency. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen.
Tracy, good evening to you. Tonight, President Joe Biden says the American Rescue Plan will give, quote, the people who keep this country going a fighting chance. Meanwhile, the immigration situation at the southern border, it's quickly becoming the front and center issue of this new administration. President Joe Biden's push to pass the American Rescue Plan becomes a reality.
Help is on the way. While
the stimulus bill adds to the already staggering U.S. debt pile, the White House time and again urged lawmakers to spend the money.
We're about to pass a historic, the most progressive bill in American history.
At the same time, all eyes on the U.S.-Mexico border.
With the crisis at the border, I know his administration doesn't want to call it that, but that's exactly what is going on there.
But the coordinator for the southern border sees it differently.
Whatever you call it wouldn't change what we're doing, because we have urgency from the president on down to fix our system.
Speaking in the White House briefing room today, Ambassador Roberta Jacobson made it clear to reporters what migrants should know.
The border is not open.
The White House has already said that migrants are being told now is not the time to come, that a majority of those who arrive at the border are being turned away. Still, kids, an ongoing surge of them, unaccompanied, keep showing up.
We've seen surges before. Surges tend to respond to hope. And there was a significant hope for a more humane policy.
Also today, Ambassador Jacobson announced the restarting of the Central American Minors Program to reunite kids with parents who are legally residing in the U.S. Also tonight, the U.S. will buy 100 million additional doses of Johnson & Johnson's coronavirus vaccine. The surplus supplies could be used for young adults or as booster shots. Now, pro-life groups say the vaccine was made from an abortion-derived cell line. Faith leaders, however, tell us it's okay to use the vaccine if there is no alternative. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
A report published earlier this week says China's abuses of the Uyghur religious minority meets the definition of genocide. The report by Newsline's Institute for Strategy and Policy says China's communist government has created a massive network of internment camps for re-education and terrorism prevention of the Uyghur Muslims. Chinese government officials have denied the accusations. Joining us now to discuss this is Gordon Chang, author of The Coming Collapse of China and the Great U.S.-China Tech War. Gordon, welcome back. Always great to have you on. The report that we just mentioned also claims that China is violating every article in the United Nations definition of genocide in regard to the treatment of Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. Can you talk more about that and what else we know about this report?
Well, the importance of this report is it comes after a number of other reports saying the same thing, and it also comes after Secretary of State Pompeo on January 19th made a determination that China was committing genocide. And by the way, the State Department yesterday affirmed that genocide determination. So what's important here is that all of the reports we're seeing are moving in the same direction, and that means the world's going to have to confront this. Because the Genocide Convention of 1948, which is what you referenced, requires signatories, which includes the United States, to punish and prevent acts of genocide.
Well, Gordon, as you mentioned, the U.S. has deemed it genocide. I know a number of other countries as well. That said, what has been done about it, if anything, and what do you think needs to happen specifically on the part of the Biden administration?
Well, there has been no costs imposed by the United States because it still is early days after that initial determination. But something will have to be done because Beijing is hosting the Winter Olympics in 2022, starting February 4th of next year. And many people are calling for a boycott of the games or moving the games to a country that is not tainted by this genocide. And so I think that the administration is going to have to make a determination what it's going to do. You know, initially, the Biden team said they weren't going to do anything. But after that, Jen Psaki, the press secretary, said that the matter is under consideration. And it has to be because this matter won't go away.
Gordon, I want to ask you, I want to go back to the Winter Olympics in Beijing. What do you think about it? Do you think that boycott is likely to happen?
I think that some countries might boycott. You know, first, though, Tracy, countries are going to ask the International Olympic Committee to move the games. And I think that that actually might gain some traction, even if there's a delay in holding the games, because the Summer Olympics, by the way, were delayed a year. But there's also something else that people don't talk about, and that is China's team should not be participating in the Olympics because Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Tibetans are not permitted to engage in sport as a practical matter. And the IOC in 1963 banned the South African team because of apartheid, because Black South Africans were not permitted to engage in sport. So I don't see how Beijing can host the games when its athletes shouldn't be participating in them.
Yeah, and Gordon, before I let you go, I don't have a lot of time, but I want to talk about this. It's been reported that China is actually laundering money for drug cartels in Mexico. What do you know about that, and what does that mean for us here in the U.S.? How concerned should we be?
We should be extremely concerned because these Chinese networks operate at least under the protection of the Chinese central government. U.S. law enforcement got no help from China on this. These new Chinese gangs are small. They're taking money from the United States and through electronic networks are moving them through China to Mexico. We can do something about this because every dollar account is in New York. But the Chinese are not helping because we could use their help in identifying these accounts.
Well, Gordon, we're going to leave it right there. Thank you so much for coming on. We always appreciate your insight. Gordon Chang, author of The Coming Collapse of China and the Great U.S.-China Tech War. Thanks again.
Thanks, Tracy.
Pope Francis says his soul is filled with gratitude after visiting Iraq and says the way forward is fraternity.
La Chiesa in Iraq è una Chiesa martire.
At his weekly talk at the Vatican, the Holy Father said the church in Iraq is a martyr church and the people have been carrying a heavy cross for years. But he said that he also saw the joy of Christ and the hope of peace. And right next door to Iraq, Syria has been in war for more than a decade. The conflict started in March 2011 following the arrest of protesters against the Syrian president. Since then, hundreds of thousands have been killed and millions have been displaced. A new report shows 86% of refugee children there do not want to return home. Joining us now is Aloysius John, Secretary General of Caritas Internationalis, which maintains a large presence in Syria. Secretary General John, welcome back. Thank you so much for being with us. Tell us about the work that Caritas is doing in Syria, and when did that work begin there?
The work in Syria has started at the time when the war started 10 years back. And since then, Caritas Internationalis member organizations have been present with the people. As you know, Caritas Internationalis is a confederation of 162 member organizations, and it's a vast network of solidarity along with the church in order to help the people. And since the war, the first day the war started, Caritas Internationalis started to work with the local church to help, to accompany, and defend the poorest and the most vulnerable there in Syria.
I want to talk about the Pope's trip now in Iraq. Do you think that will have, or has it had any effect in Syria?
Of course, the Pope's visit to Iraq was a message by itself. So the Pope's visit to Iraq was a message to the Christians in the Middle East who are undergoing a lot of suffering. For example, in Syria, these people have been suffering. Syrians are innocent people have been suffering for the past 10 years. Hundreds and thousands of lives have been lost in this bloody war, I would say. And today, people are there living in very dire conditions. And this is where the Pope's visit to Iraq was also a message to the Christians in the Middle East, where they are suffering. And Christianity and Middle East is the birthplace of Christianity, and this is where the Christians are suffering. But today, Caritas, in line with what Pope Francis said, is also defending and helping the poor. And till now, Caritas Internationalis has been giving them helped almost 10 millions of people, Christians and Muslims alike. They've helped them. And we are there in the front line on the humanitarian side, helping the people, giving them the basic needs, food, etc., as Pope Francis wanted to help them to live in dignity.
As you just mentioned, really difficult situation there in Syria. What do you think the future is like for that country? Is there reason for hope?
There is a reason for hope in everything. I think today it all depends on the will of the international community. First of all, I think the unilateral sanctions has to be looked into. It has to be now stopped, because it cannot continue like this, because it is really suppressing the population. It is not acting towards those whom it should have some impact. It's rather impacting the poorest. And today people are living without the basic needs, and it's also very difficult for Caritas to get any help into the country. And that is a major concern for us. For example, till now, 10 million people have been helped, and every year we're helping more than 500 people in Syria, in different parts of Syria. And church is the only organization present there, and along with the church, Caritas is present. And today, with the sanctions, we are not able to help them. So, if you talk in terms of hope, I think that's the first step to do in order to give people the dignity what they need.
Well, Aloysius John, Secretary General of Caritas Internationalis, we thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Coming up, jury selection. Prosecutors line up their case against the officer accused of killing George Floyd. And Catholic response. Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers shares his perspective on the trial. A fourth juror has been selected in the trial of the police officer accused of killing George Floyd. Judge Peter Cahill is in charge of the trial of Derek Chauvin, the officer accused of killing George Floyd last May in Minnesota. Yesterday, several potential jurors were dismissed, including some who said they would not be able to set aside their strong views on the case. The former police officer has pleaded not guilty to 2 charges related to Floyd's death. Joining us now is Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers, co-host of EWTN's God's Blueprint for a Happy Life. Deacon Harold, welcome back. Always so great to see you. I know that you are following these developments like so many of us. Tell us, what role can the church and faith leaders play as this trial begins later this month?
Well, first of all, I think what we have to do is continue to pray for the repose of the soul of George Floyd, and for Mr. Floyd's family, and for all the police officers and everyone involved in this case. They will definitely need our prayers. I think one thing that everybody wants to see is that justice is done in this case. As far as what we can do as leaders, Martin Luther King once said that that humanity has to evolve for all human conflict, a method that rejects aggression, revenge, and retaliation. So I think the church needs to step in and be that voice of reason in a very impassioned, a very volatile situation, that the church can be that sign of the peace that Jesus Christ came to bring, a peace beyond all understanding. And that starts with keeping calm and cool heads and allowing the justice system to do its work.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you said that, because there are fears that if Officer Chauvin is acquitted, there could be more violence like we saw last summer. How likely do you think that is to happen, and what would you like to see as the response to this trial and its eventual outcome?
Well, I hope to see an atmosphere of peace, obviously, hoping that, that love in the end prevails, right? 1 John 4:16 says that God is love. And he who lives in love lives in God, and God lives in him. So I hope that understanding of God's love living and breathing and working and moving in us prevails over the emotion that may come as a result of this case.
I know over the summer you said that we're all created to support equality and justice. That Catholics should not support the Black Lives Matter organization. Talk to us more about that, and why do you feel that way, and what sort of reaction did you receive from that statement?
Well, the statement itself, Black Lives Matter, there's nothing wrong with that. As far as it's a concept, a statement of truth, it's a good thing. But when you look at the national organization, that's a whole different story. Again, they may have taken, some things off of their website, but that doesn't change the underlying principle that, what they're saying, that they're guided by things like gender identity, gender expression. They're making space for transgender brothers and sisters. They specifically talk about dismantling the family. Dismantling the Western prescribed nuclear family, as they call it, to disrupt that. And what we should be doing is bringing people together, not pulling people apart. And as I said before, if Black lives really matter, why aren't they protesting Planned Parenthood, an organization that takes the lives of thousands and thousands of Black lives every year? What about economic growth and stability and development in Black neighborhoods? What about the end of drug and gang violence? What are they doing to actually build and strengthen Black families? In fact, What are they actually doing to make Black Lives Matter? And I don't see that doing anything. So we as Catholics cannot support an organization whose underlying principles have nothing to do with our values.
Well, Deacon Harold, thank you so much. Those are all great questions to bring up, and we look forward to having you back on the show again. Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers, co-host of EWTN's God's Blueprint for a Happy Life. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome. Thank you for having me.
Up next, Women of Courage. A religious sister who was praised for her work joins us to talk about the honor. Earlier this week, the U.S. State Department held a ceremony for the winners of the 15th Annual International Women of Courage Awards, and among the honorees was a religious sister. Sister Alicia Vacas Moro is a registered nurse who provided health care at the epicenter of the pandemic in Bergamo, Italy, where her congregation lost 10 sisters. Sister Alicia is currently the regional coordinator for the Kamboni Sisters in the Middle East, where they help to aid refugees, asylum seekers, and victims of human trafficking in that region. She was one of just 15 recipients of the International Women of Courage Award. And Sister Alicia joins us now. Sister, welcome, and so great to speak with you. First off, congratulations. What an honor. Tell us, what was your reaction when you found out that you were being honored with this award? What did you think?
Surprised. Well, of course, I feel honored and grateful for this award, but especially I feel mainly humble because I don't know, I feel my life is no different from any other sisters, surely not the sisters of my community.
Joined the Catholic Order of the Kamboni Sisters to dedicate her life.
Well, you really have done some amazing things. You know, it really is hard to believe that it's been over a year since the pandemic hit the world. I know you're in Jerusalem right now, but you were in Italy last year. What was it like there during that time, during the pandemic? And what was life like for you caring for those ill with COVID-19?
It was a very hard moment for everybody. I mean, it looked like living in a film or something like that. I had to move from Jerusalem to Bergamo in the north of Italy in the toughest moment of the pandemic at the very beginning, when it was not clear what was it about and how to deal with it. And so it was really gauching. The city was completely empty, and the only thing you could hear outside were the ambulances going to and forth to the hospital. It was a scary situation, but especially very sad because all the families were touched. I couldn't meet a person whose family was not touched by COVID. No, it was really dramatic, a very sad situation.
Yeah, it's so hard to imagine. I also understand that 10 members of your order died from the coronavirus. We are so sorry for your loss. How did you keep going after that? What kept you going?
Well, I think mainly faith and hope. I mean, our faith tells us that life is stronger than death. We were going through this very difficult situation last year at the end of Lent, and we went through the whole Holy Week, and it was very meaningful, very strong to go through the celebration of the Holy Week and celebrate Easter in grieving our sisters and grieving so many people around us, because the city had lost so many people, many friends, many people we knew, the neighbors of the house, many family members. So it was a very strong faith experience, but I think that faith is a great support, and at the end we believe that life is stronger. As a matter of fact, life goes on, and there are so many also positive and good things coming out from this moment of suffering. So much solidarity, so many acts of generosity. So I think that the faith is a great support in the moments of distress like this.
Talk to us about the work that you're doing right now in the Middle East and why it's important to you.
Well, the Middle East, and especially the Holy Land, is an amazing place. No? There are so many different layers of different things going on. From on one side, the spiritual charge of it, you know, the experience of living on the very place where salvation happened for us Christians and for the other monotheistic religions as well. But on the other hand, it's a very interesting and very challenging place from the geopolitical point of view. No? So there are so many challenges at the social and political atmosphere. No? So we work with Bedouins and with refugees mainly in my community. The Palestinian Bedouins in the West Bank and refugees coming from Africa through the peninsula of Sinai, victims of human trafficking and really very poor and marginalized people with incredible stories and traumas from their trips, especially the women. No? As it usually happens, the women are always carrying a heavier load.
Well, Sister Alicia, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for what you do. We appreciate it. And congratulations again on the honor.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.